Okay, so this morning I thought I'd record a short video on whether your pelvic floor is fit enough to run. It's kind of a misnomer because obviously you're taking your entire body out running, not just your pelvic floor. But there has been some research to show that running has more of an impact on the pelvic floor than even the likes of CrossFit. And they tested things like urinary and anal incontinence and found that running is definitely more impactful than CrossFit, which came as a surprise to some and maybe not to others. But how much impact you have going through your pelvic floor and the rest of your body for that matter, it plays a big role in pelvic floor symptoms, injury, and those kinds of things. So the populations I work with tend to be female runners, typically sort of menopause. That's just the population I work with, who've had pelvic floor symptoms for quite some time. They've either just lived with it, put up with it, or they've exercised through it or run through it, or they've got to the point where they've decided that enough's enough, and or they want to start running or exercising. So there is now a set of guidelines on return to running after childbirth, which is great. So it gives some indication of what state your body needs to be in for you to go out and run and not make things worse potentially. And those exercises that are included in the screen for that particularly are really useful, and I use some of those. And then I have some others, depending on who I've got in front of me. I do work with some men, so there are some variations. You know, men and women are very different, obviously. So there's quite I've chosen 10. I've chosen 10 out of the ones that I use for you to kind of have a play with. The idea is that if you're a runner, it will give you some idea of any potential areas of weakness that you've got, either in your core, your legs, your endurance, your stability, those kinds of things. If you do have pelvic floor issues, it will again give you some idea of where you need to kind of put your time and effort and your work. So it's just a good opportunity really to see where you're at. If you've got pelvic floor issues, we're going to be looking out for symptoms during the exercises. If you don't have pelvic floor issues, that's fine too. You do the exercises and see if you kind of pass or fail really. And if you find that there's some that are harder than others, then you know that those are the areas that you need to work on, and maybe make some headway in over sort of 6 to 8 weeks doing some exercises around that, and we'll go through that as well. So in terms of pelvic floor symptoms then, while we're doing these movements, these exercises, these holds, you would be looking for an increase in your symptoms. So for instance, if you are suffering from or living with, I hate the word suffering, if you're living with a prolapse, you'd be looking for increase in your symptoms, such as a great feeling of heaviness in your vagina, a feeling of bulging, pressure around the perineum, those kinds of things. If you are living with incontinence, you'd be looking for uncontrolled release of either pee-poo or poop. So, liquid, gas or solid. Oh God, what else was there? It's one of them days. Or pain, pelvic pain. And weirdly, with stuff like this, you can feel pain in the pelvis, obviously. So tailbone, lower back, pubic bone, groin, hips, but even, feet, shins, neck, upper back. So you're looking for an increase in any symptoms that you've got if you do have pelvic floor issues. I also actually, as an aside, I also use these, I also used a lot of these movements for runners who are returning to injury. So if somebody's been to me with whatever they've been to me with, even plantar fasciitis, shin splints, hip problems, lower back problems, can't run because of this, that and the other, we use these movements to see where they're up to. And it's not a case of, if you do some of these exercises and you think, bloody hell, I failed that and I failed that and crikey, but I'm awesome at this. Don't think that, if your symptoms of pelvic floor issues flare up, it's not a case of that you're never going to be able to do things, that you're never going to be able to go back to running. That is so far from the truth, it's unbelievable. We can, there's always something we can do. What it just shows is that there's something isn't quite working as it should. If you're returning from injury, then there's probably some more work to do around the areas that you've got weakness in. If you are coming with a pelvic floor issue, then it's an indication that the system, as in, you know, because your pelvic floor doesn't exist in isolation, it's part of a whole, and it's just an indication that there's something in the system not quite right. And it's usually a sign that whatever strategy your body is using to move at this moment in time that flares up your symptoms is not the ideal strategy for you right at this moment, and you just need to do something different. And sometimes that's when you kind of need some personal help, and that's where I step in. And everybody's different, so yeah, so what works for one doesn't always work for the other, you know. Cookie cutter approach doesn't always work, and then you need some personal help. So I'm going to go through the 10 exercises that I've kind of picked out. They are the ones that I use quite a lot. I've tried to make them the ones that don't need any kind of any props. There is one that needs a prop, but it's usually something you've got in your home. It's just a step. So I'm going to do them separately so they're easier to upload. There's 10 of them. Work your way through them, have a play, see where you get to, and let me know your results. So here we go. Look out for the next videos.